You've had the wonderful experience of being connected to two dynamic individuals, both of whom I'd like to ask you about. One is, of course, Lewis Hamilton, who you describe as one of the greatest race car drivers of his generation, but also Niki Lauda. So let's focus on Niki first. He was actually the cousin of your ex-wife. He was in your family.
Yeah, but I didn't get to know him before. It was an interesting coincidence that we ended up in the same sport. I was a non-executive at Williams, like I mentioned to you before, and he was a TV present commentator. And so we started to travel together, but the relationship wasn't particularly close. And when Mercedes asked me to buy a stake in the team, they just hired Niki Lauda as a non-executive chairman. And when we agreed the deal, they said to me, there's one slight problem. You got to tell Niki. And I said, well, didn't you tell him? And I said, no, we'd actually like you to work with him and inform him. And I saw him in Brazil and said, just to tell you, I've bought 40% in the team. And he said, okay, that comes as a surprise. Let me think about it overnight. And like Niki is, it didn't take overnight. He came back to see me an hour later and said, okay, I think together we can be more successful than me on my own. And I think you're a good investor. So from the 40%, I'd like to take 10% with in the same structure like you did, same terms and conditions. And here we go. I had 30%, he had 10. He was the non-executive chairman and I was the chief executive officer and team principal.
But you needed to come to a common understanding on a couple of things. And there was a famous Stuttgart airport conversation that you had. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, at the beginning, each of us tried to protect his area. And for him, I was a finance guy and he was the racing guy. And we often didn't share opinion. And it became quite distracting to have that internal fight. And eventually the Daimler board said, well, we can't continue like that. And they called us to Stuttgart and say, we'd like you two to run it. Niki, you're non-executive. You should let Toto run it operationally. And he said, that's when I realized that we could do it together, but in split functions. And I said to him, I'd rather have you on board, but you need to understand that your role is non-executive, but it can be so impactful. Your sheer presence gives us strengths. And then our relationship changed from a purely professional situation into friendship. And over the years, with all our traveling, because we used to travel just the two of us, and literally spending every dinner together, talking about motor racing, which we were both 100% focused on, we found out that even in our spare time, we wanted to spend time with each other and talk about motor racing. And there's a funny anecdote that we have this mandatory summer break for two and a half weeks. And I was with my family in a hotel in Sardinia. And I have a missed call at 6:30 in the morning and then another one at 7:30. So I called him back and he says, I took the boat right in front of your hotel. I was in Spain, decided to come to Sardinia, and I'm sitting in the breakfast place, having on my second espresso. Can you please come down so we can have a chat? And I opened the windows and I saw his boat literally 100 meters offshore. And I said, I can't believe it. You're stalking me now in my holidays. But to be honest, it's just what I like to have too.
You miss him every day, right?
I miss him every day. He was my closest friend at the end over many years. And so much that I learned from him. And he was just an exceptional personality. The ability at the age of 70 to still be open to new experiences, learn, accept that you're not perfect, or accept that we're all imperfect. And there's another funny story that he was a very, very experienced pilot. He had over 10,000 hours. So we were approaching Tokyo in a typhoon. his two pilots were operating the aircraft, and Niki and I sat in the cabin. And thunderstorms, lightnings, big turbulence. And suddenly Niki gets up and goes to the front, barely making it with the turbulence. And I can see that he's giving them a hard time. So he's coming back, and I said, what happened? And he says, they are stupid idiots. And I said, why are they stupid idiots? I said, well, whilst we are flying through this weather, they started to balance the plane by pumping fuel from one side to the other. And that's absolutely not necessary when in such a, let's say, a critical situation. So I said to him, whilst the plane is bouncing left, right, and center, do you think it helped the situation that you, Niki Lauda, owner of the aircraft, goes to the front, gives the two pilots a bollocking, and you walk back? Do you think that makes the situation safer? And he said, well, what would you have done? I said, well, I would have written down what they've done. And in a briefing after the flight, I would have said, that wasn't the right thing to do. Please consider that for future flights. And he said, no, that's not how I operate. I just needed to get it off the chest because I would, I just need to get the pressure off. He said, well, that's your problem. And many months later, similar situation, we're flying into LA, big turbulence. And I see him taking out a tiny little notepad from his jacket and a pen, and he's starting to write. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm still able to learn even in my old age. I'm writing stuff down that I need to tell the pilots after we've landed. So he was just an amazing personality. And because I was so close, I forgot that he was the 3-time Formula One world champion, a driver that stepped out of the fire and survived, came back, won another championship, created his own airline, extremely successful. And here we go. He was my friend, and he was nothing else than Niki, and a very close ally of Susie, my wife, and I.
And a very influential part of Lewis Hamilton's life. So your two worlds kind of connecting there, with the two of them. And